Hi everyone! In this video, we are going to cover resume writing basics, and I will explain the essential concepts of resume writing that you need to know to write an effective resume. First, we're going to answer the big question, what is a resume, and explain why employers often require them. Then, I will go over the typical resume review process and how employers usually screen candidates for jobs. After that, we're going to do a quick resume role-playing activity so you can experience what it's like for an employer to screen resumes. And finally, I will share with you the 6 resume writing rules you need to follow to have an effective resume. Let's get started. So, what is a resume? Well, it helps to know what the word means. You've probably noticed that the word resume is often written with 1 or 2 accents over the E's. That's because it is actually a French word that means a summary. And that's all this document is supposed to be, a summary. Not your life story, and not a comprehensive listing of your entire employment history. Rather, a resume summarizes your qualifications for a job and the value you offer to a particular employer. You'll have opportunities to share details and connect with your employer more personally during the job interview, but for now, it's about quickly showing them your qualifications and sharing the things that make you stand out as a candidate. Beyond that, your resume is also your first interaction with an employer, usually. If you've been doing a good job networking, perhaps looking for job opportunities at career fairs, conferences, and especially talking to people you know about open positions, then you might have already met the hiring manager. But in most cases, the majority of positions you apply for will consist of attaching your resume to online job application software or to an email. So it's important that this document represent you professionally. And most importantly, your resume should be focused on your future, not the past. This is one of the great mistakes in resume writing. While this document is made up of facts and figures about your past, the focus needs to be on your future, on the job you are applying for. Everything about your resume should be tailored to show the employer how you uniquely fulfill the requirements of the position and demonstrate why you are the best candidate for the job. Now let's talk about the resume review process. On average, employers report spending about 4 to 5 minutes on each resume that is actually read, but only 6 to 15 seconds giving it an initial screening. That means if you don't capture your reader's attention within a few seconds, they are likely to move on and not read your resume. You have to understand that employers often need to review dozens of candidates for just one job opening. With the time it takes to look through the application, cover letter, resume, and supporting documents like transcripts and recommendation letters, it can easily take more than 15 minutes to review all of the materials for each candidate. But, since time is limited, most employers quickly screen through an applicant's materials first and look for candidates who can easily be disqualified. In a 2018 study by The Ladders, eye tracking technology was used to reveal that the average time spent screening their test resumes was actually just 7.4 seconds. So, the real question is, would your resume pass the test? Can you design your summary to grab a reader's attention in a matter of seconds? Let's learn more about this by going through the process ourselves. For this role-playing activity, we are going to pretend that we are a doctor's office hiring for a medical assistant position. Most job postings will center on 3 to 5 core qualifications the employer is looking for, and often these will involve a specific amount of prior experience, an educational requirement, and a list of required skills. Here, we are looking for the following: someone with at least 3 years of experience, a person who is bilingual in English and Spanish, experience in urinalysis and phlebotomy. Of course, medical assistants have a variety of skills, but we are looking for these 2 in particular. Graduation from a medical assistant training program, and since our doctors are pediatricians, we would like someone with experience working with children. Now, in a moment, you are going to review the first applicant's resume, and you will have 15 seconds to check for these qualifications. You will have a 5-second countdown timer, and then the resume will scroll slowly past the screen. Try to read the resume just like you would read any other document. Relax. And remember, we are looking for the following: at least 3 years of experience, bilingual language skills in English and Spanish, experience in urinalysis and phlebotomy, which are odd keywords that should pop out if you see them, graduation from a medical assistant training program, and experience working with young pediatric patients. Are you ready? Here we go! Okay, here comes the 5-second countdown timer. And begin. Time's up. How did it go? 15 seconds is very fast, right? If you are like most people who try this, you probably caught one or two of the items we were looking for. You probably saw the word medical assistant several times and believe this applicant has some experience, but you're not certain if they meet the 3-year minimum. It's unlikely that you saw whether or not this applicant is bilingual. You may have noticed the words urinalysis and phlebotomy, but you're not sure. You also might think you saw that they completed a medical assistant training program. And finally, the word pediatric was probably in there, so you would be comfortable assuming that they have pediatric experience. Overall, this applicant didn't do so great. Now, let's look at the second applicant. This person read the job description carefully and incorporated that information throughout their resume. I'm going to give you the same 15 seconds, and the second resume will scroll across the screen just as the first. Relax, and read the resume the same way you did the first time. Remember, we are looking for the following: at least 3 years of experience, bilingual language skills in English and Spanish, experience in urinalysis and phlebotomy, graduation from a medical assistant training program, and experience working with young pediatric patients. Okay, here we go. And begin. Time's up. How did it go that time? Better? Most people think so. But the question is, why was the resume better the second time? You probably noticed that much of the information we were looking for was located right at the top of the resume, and emphasis was added to help you find it. You probably saw that this person has 5 years of experience, is bilingual in Spanish, has experience with pediatric patients, and is skilled in phlebotomy and urinalysis. You may or may not have seen if the person graduated from a medical assistant training program, but overall, this candidate seems much more qualified than the first. Now, let's compare these two resumes side by side. The first resume we looked at is on the left, and the second resume is on the right. Now, the first thing to point out is that these two resumes actually belong to the same person. That's right, they both belong to our friend Anita Goodjob. So both of these applicants have identical experience, skills, and education. The only difference is in how the information was organized on the document. So for the first qualification we were looking for, 3 years of experience, the first applicant only listed their dates of employment in the work experience section, which is expected on resumes. However, in order for an employer to determine whether or not the candidate has the required experience, they would have to do the math and count it all up. This is not too difficult of a task, but it can easily waste much of the few seconds you have of the employer's attention, and in this case, they would probably only count the experience until they verify that there is at least 3 years. On the second resume, the candidate still included their dates of employment in their work experience section, but also included the total in the professional profile summary at the top. In this case, the employer is not only able to verify that the requirement has been met, but can quickly assess that this candidate exceeds the requirement and actually has over 5 years of experience. The second thing we were looking for was bilingual language skills in English and Spanish. The first resume did include this information, but it was relatively hidden down in the work experience section. On the second resume, this skill was prominently included at the top of the resume in the second line of the professional profile, making it much easier to find. It's also important to note that the second resume used the phrase bilingual in Spanish to match the terminology on the job posting, rather than by trying to explain their experience of translating English and Spanish as on the first resume. The third qualification we were looking for were skills in phlebotomy and urinalysis. Both resumes included these keywords several times throughout, but only the second resume placed those terms in the professional profile and skills section to make them easy to locate. Incorporating a skills section at the top of your resume is a great place to list key knowledge, skills, and abilities that you know an employer is looking for. Our fourth qualification was graduation from a medical assistant training program. As expected, both resumes listed this information in their respective education sections. However, the second resume not only moved the entire education section to a higher place in the resume, recognizing that it was one of the employer's main qualifications, but also reordered the education list to make graduation from the medical assistant training program the first one on the list. This was important not only to make that educational qualification more prominent, but also because the more recent education was not required for this position and is still just in progress. Our final qualification was experience working with pediatric patients. Once again, both resumes included this information in several places, but only the second resume placed this qualification at the top of the resume and added emphasis to it. Now, this candidate also has experience working at an adolescent center and in a family clinic, but because the employer was specifically looking for pediatric experience, the resume brings special attention to that part of the applicant's work history. The red line on the screen represents the halfway point on the resume. Notice that the first resume barely covered any of the essential points within the first 50% of the document, but the second resume already addressed all of the main qualifications within the first 40% of the resume. This is one of the main characteristics of effective resumes. They focus on key information from the job posting and make it easy for the employer to find. Okay, so it turns out that since you now know how a resume is read, you know how one should be written. So here are my 6 resume writing rules. Rule number 1. Limit your resume to a summary. Your goal for this document is to clearly communicate that you meet or exceed the qualifications for the job and can add value to this particular employer. And keep in mind that this means your resume will probably need at least some minor updates for each job you apply for. That brings us to rule number 2. Make your impact in 15 seconds or less. Use emphasis sparingly, but as needed to highlight everything that makes you qualified for the job you are applying for. Remember, if you grab the reader's attention quickly, they will likely spend several minutes actually reading all about you. Rule number 3. To help make your impact quickly, place key information at the top of your resume. Employers are just like you. They read from top to bottom and from left to right. So keep that in mind when you write your resume and lead with the most important information first. Rule number 4. Integrate job posting language throughout your resume. The best way to do this is to read through the job posting a few times and highlight all reoccurring themes, industry keywords, and any qualifications that seem non-negotiable. Make sure everything you know the employer is looking for ends up in your resume in similar terms as those used on the job posting. This also is important in case the employer is using applicant tracking software that pre-screens your resume before it gets passed along to a real person. Rule number 5. Highlight both your skills and accomplishments. While the main focus of your resume is to make it clear that you meet the minimum qualifications for the job, the rest of the document should be aimed at sharing relevant skills and accomplishments that demonstrate the value you can bring to future employers. Share the things you are most proud of in your experience. List achievements. Tell them things that changed for the better as a result of your work, and add numeric values to your successes such as percentages or dollar amounts. And finally, rule number 6. Make your resume easy to read. Don't make employers hunt for critical information, and don't get carried away with fancy fonts, formats, and designs. My advice: simple is the way to go. You can use templates and resume generators if you want, or if you don't feel comfortable formatting business documents, but just be sure to pick a layout that achieves the rules above. If you're not sure your resume is easy to read, ask someone you know to give it the 15-second test. If they can find your main points in 15 seconds, then an employer will too. And that's all there is to it. Now take these tips and start writing your most effective resume ever.